Good evening, everyone, and welcome to yet another fireside conversation on Chronicles of Executive Presence. Today, I have with me Mr. Abhinav Singhal. Abhinav is the head of strategy for Asia Pacific and Japan for SAP. Prior to this, he has led strategy and digitalization in Thrims Group, Dell, and worked in McKinsey for several years as an associate partner. It is indeed a pleasure to welcome him, a boy from my city. Welcome, Abhinav, for this session of Chronicles of Executive Presence.
Thanks, Nandita. I'm glad to be here and look forward to the conversation.
Same here, because I have a question right away for you before I go into the standard questions, Abhinav.
Sure.
Somebody from a place like Lucknow, being a young leader, a dynamic leader, and making it big for yourself in the industry across geographies, how was the journey is what I want to first understand from you.
Wow, that is a very reflective question. I think
Yeah.
it might be cliche, right? But when you go along the journey, you never have milestones which you are hitting, and it just happens. So it's easier to talk about in the past. As you said, right, I started from Lucknow. I had no big aspirations, just to go do my engineering, do my MBA, and find a corporate job. And then I
Okay.
landed up in McKinsey after my MBA, which I think was pivotal because that was the first time I really stepped out of Lucknow and stepped into the corporate world. And consulting gives you great access to work across different clients, customers,
True.
industries. So it makes you really adaptable. And I think that's when I really opened as an individual and groomed my personality. And then beyond that, then I kept on moving out. I moved out of India after finishing McKinsey in 2016. That was the second milestone of getting now more international exposure and working with clients across Southeast Asia, Europe, and yeah. And then I think step by step that journey kept on building on. I would say just do what you enjoy doing, and then it all falls in place eventually.
Okay, so I will take a step back, and and for those who are logging in, and we believe that leadership is all about power, aggression, being outspoken. I remember you as a schoolboy, Abhinav, extremely diligent. I remember that, and you were a very quiet boy. So one thing that whenever I look at you and the way you've actually moved, and the kind of influencer you are, and you also have a course on Udemy today, which is a wow thing for me when I see all those things. I always think, for you to be a great leader, for you to have executive presence, an introverted person that you are can also become a great leader. Am I right when I say this, or you have actually worked on yourself and become a more outspoken leader? I want to understand that. I do see you giving a lot of talks these days,
No,
but
you
how's your personality changed?
Yeah, no, you have seen me as a kid, right? So you're absolutely right. I was a very shy and introverted kid. In
Yeah.
fact, I remember I used to hate and fear public speaking all through my
Okay.
schooling. And I remember in my college, I had gone to IIT BHU for my engineering. In my second year, I forced myself to sign up for a debate because I thought it's important part of personality to get used to public speaking. And I went up to the podium and I tried speaking, and I was just blank. I had a panic attack. My heartbeat was rising, and I
Oh
just
my God.
went blank, and I couldn't finish the debate. But I think what really stood with me is that I knew that is an area I need to develop because as an introvert, it's not my natural strength. And then over the years, I forced myself to speak. First in smaller
Okay.
groups with content I'm aware of, then in larger groups. And it was a journey. My first few speeches were always tough. I had to do a lot of preparation, a lot of practice. But over the years, it starts becoming natural. And the best part is our brains are very adaptable. Once you start doing it, you get used to it. So if there is anybody out there who's like me, who's introvert, I would only you can only advise them the only way out is forcing yourself to do it, and soon it will become a habit.
Awesome. So, which brings me to the first official question, which is what I ask most leaders who come in. You said, you have to force yourself when you realize what is your weakness. So what, according to you, are the top three attributes of a great leader?
Yeah. I think leadership is a very commonly used word, right? In
Yeah.
management parlance, everybody talks leadership, and you'll ask these questions to 100 people, you'll get 100 answers. Everybody has a
True.
view of who is a leader. And if I have to pick three characteristics across my experience of what has really stood out across all leaders, I think it's very simple and straightforward. I think the first element is you need to have some sort of goal, vision, purpose, objective, whatever you want to call it, as a leader, on what is the outcome you want to achieve for that team, for that unit, or even for yourself as a leader, what you want to achieve, right? Unless you have that clarity of thought, then you will never be effective in mobilizing the team and ensuring that you're able to create some impact for whatever you want to do. So I think that is one. How do you create a clear, compelling vision or objective? The second element is then whichever team you are leading, how can you really understand them, what's in it for them, engage them? Can you hear me?
Abhinav, just hold the line, please. Just hold the line. I think there is a network issue. Just give me a second.
No, no worries.
Abhinav, no, just hold the line. I think there's a network issue. Let me just check that out, please.
Sure.
Yeah, 1 second. Yeah. Abhinav, can you? Yeah, I think
I
we'll
can
have to.
hear you.
There was a network issue.
No worries. No worries. Should I continue?
Go ahead.
Great. So I was just saying, in terms of leadership qualities, right? First element, having a clear vision, goal, objective on what you want to achieve. Second
Okay.
element, having that ability to connect with the team members, understand what's in it for them, to follow that
Okay.
objective, motivating them, inspiring them. And the
Mm-hmm.
third element is then creating that trust based environment where the team can execute and learn from whatever we are implementing or executing towards. Because oftentimes people get the first two elements right, but if you do not have an
True.
environment where people can feel
Hmm.
safe, comfortable, and have trust, then you fall
Hmm.
again as a leader during that implementation journey. So I think these are two or three attributes which I feel have really worked out in every leader I've seen who has been successful.
Awesome. So, how have you seen the leadership styles change across geographies? Because you have worked across geographies, Abhinav.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think even within geographies, there are a lot of variation, right, in leadership
Mm-hmm.
styles. For
Yeah.
example, if I think about someone who is working within India in a public sector organization versus a private sector organization, you will
Mm-hmm.
see different traits in leadership.
Yeah.
Typically, in public sector, people tend to respect hierarchy much more compared to a
Huh.
private sector organization where you can be more vocal and have an independent opinion and you can express dissent. If you extend this further now from Indian to a Western company or a corporate, then I think on
Hmm.
that element it is even more extreme, right? In a Western organization, you are encouraged to voice your opinion, and ultimately, if you're leading a topic or a project, you are the expert. So it's okay if you have a different opinion. You can conflict. You can give your viewpoint out, and that's something we are not comfortable typically when we start our careers in India, for example. So I think
Very true.
that is one element which is very, very different. I think the other element which is different is in India, the focus of leadership is a lot on execution, on getting things done.
Okay.
Versus in Western organization, the job of the leader is a lot more on communicating the vision, the purpose, and having clarity on why we are doing it. Because as a
Okay.
society, people there are uh, encouraged from beginning to challenge everything and not accept, which means that you need to have that clarity on why are you doing it. Otherwise people will challenge and not buy into that. For example, I remember when we were working in Australia and you say, I'm the CEO, I want to get this job done, people will not follow it. They will question, we don't believe it's the right thing to do. and
Okay.
and that's something you don't expect, right? That if a CEO is giving an
Exactly.
order, everybody would just fall in place and get it done.
True.
But that's the culture, because people have been brought up in a way where you have to question and you need to believe in it to get something done. So I think those are few elements which have been varying across cultures. Typically Asian
Hmm.
are very similar to our Indian culture, but I think Western or European culture is slightly different on these elements. The last element I think is also on lifestyle and work life balance. I feel in India we are still much more committed, disciplined, and obsessed in hard working. And in Western organizations, people believe that they have all their basic needs met. So work is not the end of life, and they need to have a balance and have great time and capacity for their personal life as well. So I feel that that element is still something we haven't done enough here, which makes it sustainable.
Interesting, very interesting perspective, Abhinav. Abhinav, I'm going to go back to what you said, and you said, outside India, it is equal. It's okay to challenge status quo because you leading a team or something is you seen as an expert or leading a project.
Yeah.
Because when you take it into with your Indian counterparts, it's a little lower. And thankfully, if you go to a government organization, it doesn't exist. It's all about seniority in number of years. Now, you've been a young leader and you worked in India. How difficult was it? And you come from a background where you have people into the so-called government sector where,
Yeah.
your number of years made everything was considered. So how do
Yeah.
you think when you went out as a leader, what were some of the things that you kept in mind so that what you said to was heard or you were able to influence the people around you is something that I'd like to understand from you.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think the best thing you can do when you are young and you have to manage senior stakeholders is build credibility with them. And by that I
Awesome.
mean that if you are working on a topic or on a project, you need to
Mm-hmm.
establish that you have done your homework. You need to understand that if you're making a recommendation or you have a conflicting point of view, that you have data fact base behind it which you can support and justify. And then you also need to read into what is the best way of communicating your dissent, right? So for example, if there is a very status hierarchy driven culture, I wouldn't recommend you go and just start challenging everyone, because the recipient will not be open to hearing that, right? You can
True.
always have a smaller one-on-one discussion where you can still make your point across. So I think you have some freedom in the way you communicate. You can also rope in another senior, for example in consulting, when you are a new associate fresh out of college, you feel you have a different opinion, you would rope in a project manager or a partner to go along with you and express that dissent, because it will be much there will be much more openness to hear from, let's say, a person who's perceived as a counterpart than a young leader. But I think what you need to be smart is there are ways of putting your point across, and there are many ways you can influence.
Awesome. I like the way that you need to be smart enough to identify a way to put your point across. That is what a young leader thinks about today. So thank you for that. Moving on, Abhinav, this word called executive presence, leadership presence is something that is very differently perceived across geographies. Okay.
Yeah.
So what, according to you, are the three key things that constitute executive presence based on your experience so far?
I think you are the expert on this topic, so I will love to hear your opinion on this as well. Uh,
Sure. After
but
yours, for sure.
but I think for me, I was thinking about, because this was also the whole focus, right, of a conversation. The best way of thinking about this is you think of any product, right, which you want to
Mhm.
market. So imagine any FMCG product. It can come in different packagings depending on which brand
Mhm.
you're buying it. So
Yeah.
let's say a soap, you can have a Ayurvedic soap, you can have a
Mhm.
very refined, ultra luxurious soap, and even through just by looking at it, by the brand name, by the packaging, you will have an opinion whether what's the price point and what's the ingredient of that, right? So it's
True.
in a very similar way. When you are a leader, you need to communicate your brand value or value proposition to the group, and it has to be consistent with what's inside. So with the Ayurvedic soap, then potentially the packaging has a saint or a rishi like Baba Ramdev would have, right, with the Patanjali logo. And if
True.
it's a green soap, you would
Uh,
have some of these colors to amplify. If it is a luxurious soap, you would have a great model or a potentially a foreign name to exemplify. Do I still have you there? Can you hear me clearly? Can you hear me, Nandita? I think there is a lag. Let me know if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yes.
Okay, great, great.
Yeah.
I think we are having some troubles
I
with the
am having
line.
some network issue, I believe,
No
because all of a
worries.
sudden it just
So
goes off. Yeah.
yeah, I
Yeah.
was just building on that analogy, right? That there are
Yeah.
two parts to that product which you're buying. A, what is the first impression or perception you get just by looking at the product, the colors,
Hmm.
the visual, the design, and second, what is the real content inside it? And oftentimes, when you think of executive presence, we talk about the external image. How are we perceived? How are we dressing? Which is great.
Hmm.
It also has to be consistent with what you do as a person, your personality, your character, and the brand you're representing. And that to me are the two core elements of executive presence, which is how do people perceive you and how do you create trust and credibility? But then how do you follow up with a coherent personality or a character or a thought process which is consistent with the image you're giving? And to give you an example, if you think of executive presence, typically you think of people, right, who are gray, navy blue suits and who are all well dressed, right? If you think of a CEO or an executive leader, but in the tech industry, you also see now equally big or even bigger leaders who come in with shorts and t-shirts or a jacket, and they're also perceived as a CEO, right? Let's say Mark Zuckerberg as an example. Why is that? Because they want to give a impression about the brand they are leading, something which is agile, which is not boxed into a suit, which is
Awesome.
not old age, and that is consistent with the story they are telling and the company they are leading. So I think that consistency of character and that credibility is core part of executive presence.
Awesome. Abhinav, you've stolen my examples of Mark Zuckerberg and agility that I use, because I have a question that I'm always asked is, when appearance is such an integral part of branding, then why does Mark Zuckerberg come in shorts and a black t-shirt? And my answer is always the same. It is about what you're representing rather than, being in a blue suit or a gray suit or a black suit for that matter. So I could remember, I can 20 years back, if I thought of leaders, they were always in black suits with the tie.
Right.
Today, very, very few, even organizations which are into manufacturing, have moved away from that whole cliche of power dressing. The concept of power
Right.
dressing has changed, because
Correct.
the way you present yourself talks about your core values, and that for me, like you asked, is executive presence. First you need to identify what your core values are, and
Yes.
as a leader who has that present, you need to elude it in every way. The way you communicate, the way you talk, walk, everything, and also be able to deliver massive value is what I
Yeah.
personally think is something that is important. Value to your stakeholders, which could be your internal customers, external customers, your bosses, your team, so that they see you as somebody who can inspire, and you are doing it day in day out without not because it's COVID you're doing it, or not because it's not COVID or whatever.
Correct.
So
Correct.
situations don't change you, it only makes you more better to show your value systems, is what I believe is all about executive presence. So
And maybe if
that's
I
my.
can build one comment on that. So typically, again, when
Sure.
you are in middle of your career or you're looking at the next leap, right, from middle management or to senior management, a lot of times people have this struggle or establishing their presence, right? I
True.
remember when in my career there were times when I got feedback, right, that if you're invited in a meeting, can you be more present, for example? And there it almost needs to be a habit. For introverts especially, it might not come across naturally that you are establishing your presence and you're communicating in a very powerful and engaging manner, because you tend to shy away and tend to keep quiet. So there is an element of how you dress up and how you present yourself, but then there is also element of what are two or three actions you can take so that in every interaction you can reinforce your presence. And I say this to my team members: if you're invited to a meeting and if you don't speak up, then you don't deserve your place. I think.
Yeah. No, you're back again, Abhinav. I think there is
Okay,
some
great.
digging work
So
happening. Yeah, sorry.
I
Yeah.
think when anyone has this doubt, right, should I speak up or establish my presence? The simple mantra is, if you are invited to a meeting and you don't participate, then next time you should not be there in that meeting, right? So you need to force yourself and
Wow.
establish your presence.
I love the way you explain this. If you're invited to a meeting and you don't speak, next time you're not required. I think that's a very, very powerful statement. And really nice to hear somebody so young actually believe. And I've seen the transition in you. When I say transition, not in so much in terms of changing who you are as a person, because you still are the same person, but in terms of the confidence that you have, in terms of actually having that presence. So my last question today for you would be, and I must for sharing an incident where you were given a feedback, because it takes a lot of courage to go on a public forum and say that you were given a feedback which was not positive. Thank you for that. And I'm sure it will motivate all the youngsters who are listening in to us today. My last question to you would be, what is your one tip to, or advice or recommendation, however you want to put it, to young leaders who want, have it in them and want to do something great and leave a mark in this world? So what is your one advice to them?
Wow. I think irrespective of leadership, right? If it's about who wants to leave a mark in the world, I think persistence and practice is
Mhm.
underrated. So whatever vision you have, whatever you want to do, the only way it will pan out is if you practice hard and you persist with that vision and objective, despite of obstacles, despite of you failing, despite of things not working out in the near term. But if you persist, then things always work out. So I think that is the one advice I would have. Just go for it, and don't shy of practicing and persisting behind it.
Awesome. So I'm sure the people listening in today have a lot of questions for you. Abhinav would be joining us in a panel discussion after 1 week, wherein we'll also take a deep dive into some of his experiences, some of the challenges he spoke about, and understand what did it take for him to have that presence that he has in the market. And he will also, be talking to other leaders across geographies. And very interestingly, this panel discussion that we have on the 13th of February will be 3 Indian leaders who made a mark for themselves overseas. So you will see a lot of Indian leaders make a mark for themselves in the Indian soil, on the Indian soil. But these are leaders from India who made a mark, who are in leadership positions across the globe. Next week, we will have Pallavi Varma with us, who is yet another leader you would love to listen to. So do join in on 13th of February to listen to the panel discussion where Abhinav is going to take a deep dive on some of the questions that I have. Thank you so much for coming in. It was a pleasure talking to you, Abhinav.
Likewise, thank you for inviting Nandita, and for all the listeners, look forward to having you back at the panel discussion.
Thank you, and take care, stay safe, and have a great week ahead.
You too. Thank you.